Yo, Shortbox Nation. Hello again. Welcome back. And you know what? Thanks for pressing play today. If you're new, welcome to the show. My name is Bodder, and this is the Shortbox Podcast, the comic book talk show that brings you the best conversations about your favorite comics with the creators that put their blood, sweat, and tears into making them. This is episode 467. And today we'll be joined by New York Times bestselling author and award-winning comic artist / writer Jeff Lemire. Jeff is the creator of several acclaimed graphic novels like Sweet Tooth, Essex County, The Underwater Welder, and Trillium. Jeff has also written Green Arrow, Justice League and Animal Man for DC Comics, and Moon Knight and Hawkeye for Marvel Comics. And if you go into your local comic shops right now, you know this episode drops on Wednesdays. That's how Shortbox releases. If you go into your local comic shop right now for new Comic Book Day, chances are you'll see Jeff's name on a few current comic books. He's writing things like for DC Comics, like Absolute Flash, as well as a brand new Robin and Batman series with Dustin Nguyen. And for his creator-owned stuff, he's got things like Phantom Road on Image Comics and Minor Arcana for Boom Studios. Luckily, though, high-volume output and high-level quality go hand in hand for Jeff Lemire. He's literally one of the best Canadian cartoonists working in comics today. He's actually got the award to prove it, as well as a bunch of other Schuster Awards and Eisner Awards to his name. But we're not here to talk about his accolades. Jeff is on the show today to talk about his new book, 10,000 Ink Stains. It's a hardcover graphic memoir that's available. It's a hardcover graphic memoir that's available for purchase right now. It's out through It's out through Dark Horse Comics. It's a personal memoir chock full of essays, never before seen art, as well as behind the scenes stories about the making of comics like Essex County, Sweet Tooth, and a whole lot more. Comedian and actor Patton Oswalt called it, and I quote here, a gorgeous, helpful memoir / visual journey of how Jeff Lemire found his voice, end quote. And I'm not Patton Oswalt, but I did have a chance to read an advanced copy of it, and I absolutely co-signed that sentiment. And I want to add that, in my opinion, it is the perfect book for process junkies, aspiring comic creators, and really anyone who's interested in what it really means to put your blood, sweat, and tears into your work. So without further ado, Shortbox Nation, let's welcome Jeff Lemire to the show. Hey, Jeff, how you doing today?
Good, thanks.
Jeff, I told you before we hit record, I thoroughly enjoyed the book. I didn't expect to finish it and I didn't finish it in one setting, but I thought this would be a book that I'd read enough pages to get accustomed to, for the interview. And in a weird way, we had to reschedule a few times, but it gave me even more opportunity to finish the book throughout. And I got to say, man, you've created something really awesome with this book. Matter of fact, let me go grab it. For the video viewers, you can actually see it is a nice, decent hardcover size book. It's oversized. It looks great as well. I think this is one of those books that you would proudly kind of display. How's the reception been so far? I know that the book came out this week. We're recording
basically yesterday. Yeah, so it's been really positive. Obviously, it's close to my heart. It's sort of, in a lot of ways, the most personal project I've ever really released. The most autobiographical. So it's a bit scary, kind of putting yourself out like that after so many years of doing stories, but kind of hiding yourself in different characters or different worlds and things. It's a little scary to kind of be sharing the truth behind all that stuff a little bit. Yeah. But I think it was a good time for me to be doing that and sort of reflecting on my work and kind of getting ready for the next stuff. So yeah.
And I gotta say, I think it comes at a good time because I'm noticing this year, I'm noticing that more and more comic creators are starting to get in front of the spotlight. I love the way that you phrase it, where you've been sharing bits and pieces of your life throughout the different projects and comics that you've been put out, but through the mask of a different character and bits and pieces here and there. But it's been interesting in the last, I'll say 5 years, to see all the different documentaries and things like memoirs and autobiographies from other comic creators. This year alone, the Alex Ross Legend of Kingdom Come documentary just came out. That was a Kickstarter thing that finally came out. It was fantastic. And then in 2020, Mike Mignola put out his Drawing Monsters documentary. And I'm all here for that. For comic creators, especially artists and auteurs, to share these intimate details about these projects and what it's like working in the industry and things like that. Did you have any, I guess, documentaries, or whether they be comic related or not, that were maybe your inspiration or North Star when it came to writing 10,000 Ink Stains?
I don't know. I've always been a process junkie, you know, like I think more than any specific kind of influence, just in general, I love reading about comics as much as I love reading comics themselves, you know.
Hmm.
I'm, I'll read, you know, I love reading interviews with creators about books that I've read. I love reading, you know, Dave Gibbons put out a kind of something similar a couple of years ago. It was sort of a memoir, an art book that kind of cataloged his whole career, which is obviously much longer than and more storied than mine. But you know, I love kind of seeing that behind the scenes stuff and getting into the process that my favorite artists sort of go through their lives and their work, and kind of seeing the trajectory of their careers and stuff.
Hmm.
Um, and these essays that I wrote for this book obviously started off as Substack posts, you know, for just going book by book and sharing process stuff and like the stories behind each project. And I did a few of those, and once I had done two or three of them, it kind of felt like it built some momentum, and I kind of wanted to make it complete, you know, until the cover the whole career from beginning to now. And uh, yeah, so it just sort of kind of took on a life of its own, and turned into the book that came out this week, which is, you know, something I'm really proud of.
Is it as therapeutic as I think it would be to like have this exercise to go through? Because I mean, you're sharing like old photos, you're sharing unreleased sketches, you know, artwork that people hasn't I haven't seen before. I think some scripts. Like, is it as therapeutic as I think it would be, or is it challenging to like have to go through, you know, old things and, you know, see the progress and the growth, or maybe even like have, you know, certain memories or situations like, you know, have to think about those again.
Yeah, I think it can be a bit of both. You know, I think there were times where it felt really freeing and kind of cathartic to put stuff down on paper that I've been carrying around, stories or feelings about things. And then there were other times where things were a bit more challenging, and maybe certain sections of my career that I wasn't as compelled to like revisit. But if I wanted to be a completist, I kind of had to, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, it can be a bit of both. But I think, you know, I wrote most of the book, probably finished it over a year ago, so I've had a little bit of perspective
Oh
now.
wow.
And uh, yeah, I think I'm ultimately very cathartic, and kind of it was like a nice sort of, okay, like take stock of everything I've done. All right, that's out of my system now. Let's move forward again, kind of feeling, which is nice.
Yeah. I gotta give you props too, because this inspired me to look at my storage situation a little different. I think for many comic book collectors and serious fans, there's a little bit of a hoarder situation, you know, and depending on who you know you are, you know, that might differ. Maybe you know you don't have you know a stack of books everywhere in your house versus someone like me. I've got a separate storage unit for things like posters and comics I've collected throughout the years. And getting to see you know this book and you know how you incorporate some of these things that you've held on to for so many years is inspiring, because I ended up looking at my wife like, see, I told you this stuff can come in handy at some point later on. And I guess like, have you always been someone that held on to a lot of things? Like what is your storage situation looking like? Do you keep copies of script and of all your scripts and artwork? Is that something that like is conscious for you?
Um, yeah, I mean, for the most part, I I keep all my sketchbooks and I keep all my artwork. You know, I do sell artwork obviously through my dealer, but I keep before I sell anything, I'll keep a selection of my favorite stuff for myself. You know, and um, yeah, I'm pretty good about archiving that stuff and taking care of it. You know, in terms of books and stuff, though, not so much. Like I'm pretty. I'll give away books and get rid of them pretty fast. Like don't feel the connection to that stuff as much. But my own work, I kind of feel. I don't know. I just feel like it's a part of me in a weird way, a small part of me. So I kind of hold on to it and take care of it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to view it, and I think it comes across in the memoir really well that you really do. You are someone that really that has put their heart and soul into all of the projects. You know, I really enjoyed hearing you know you know where you were at in your life. You know, it wasn't all like you know success and roses and all of that. Like you know, there were some difficult things that you had to overcome that you were very honest and sharing in the book. And I guess was there any hesitance at any point during the process of writing this where you thought maybe that you were maybe sharing too much or being too vulnerable? Like, I guess, how did you balance being like, you know, honest and vulnerable with still like maintaining some parts of it for yourself?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of things that I didn't put in, in the book, so you'll never know. But
Got it.
the
Got it.
stuff that is there,
Yeah.
I presume you're talking about some of the things I shared about sort of some struggles with depression and anxiety and things like that. And um,
Well, that and just like, just being kind of blunt and honest about, hey, I was working with this company, and I just wasn't really feeling inspired. Like I think you said something in the book about your Hawkeye run. You were like, hey, look, it's a solid run, but considering all the things going on behind the scenes, like I look at it I can look at it objectively and be like, it was solid, which I appreciate. Like these are conversations I think that fans are having about your work. So it's interesting to get your opinion on it and for you to kind of like just be kind of blunt about the stuff that you're sharing.
yeah, well, I mean, it's a job like any other, and that you when you're doing creator own work, you have a lot more control over things, obviously. But when you do work for Marvel or DC, you do give up a certain amount of control, and you kind of hope everything lines up, and you get with a great artist and a great editor who gets you, and you can do something special, and that does happen, but it doesn't always happen because you
Mm-hmm.
can't always control everything, And I think the thing to remember is like, uh, you go into every project wanting to do something great. You really do. Like you don't. I mean, I do anyway. I've never taken something just for cash or just for whatever any other reason other than I was excited about the potential and the story. Um, and sometimes it just doesn't come together, as much as you want it to, and I guess it's okay to be honest about that. There are things I've done like that weren't as strong as, when you do it, you do as many books as I have, they're not all going to be
Yeah.
10 out of 10s, but you kind of hope your track record, for the most part, the good outweighs the bad. And
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, there were times at Marvel and DC where things lined up perfectly, like with Animal Man or
Mm-hmm.
Moon Knight at Marvel. Like it was just like serendipity, the right artist, the right time in my life for that character, and the right editors who just really let me do my thing. And then there were other stuff where you wanted to do that, but it just didn't quite happen. Things didn't click, but that's just the way it is. That's part of the creative life, I guess. It's not always going to click.
Yeah, and I guess on the topic of your extensive career, it does feel like at this point you could fill up a small library with just Jeff Lemire work, whether it be the things that you've been the auteur or written and done the art as well. And I ask this respectfully: do you feel like an elder statesman, like someone that could give advice to aspiring? Like, how often are you giving advice to aspiring artists or interacting with writers and creators at conventions and helping them out? Like, do you feel like you're in a position to dish out like that type of advice?
It's funny. It's like life comes at you fast. It feels like it was like yesterday that I was like the new guy at DC doing Animal Man and Sweet Tooth, and then
Yeah.
but then you realize, yeah, that's like 15 years ago now, and there's like a whole
Crazy.
new generation of creators now younger than me who, so yeah, it kind of, things shift quick, and you start to realize, oh, wait a minute, I have been around for a while, and there are people who come to me and ask advice and who kind of look up to me or whatever, and you kind of, so your perspective certainly shifts, and I think a part of that was why I did this book, where it's, I think in some way just sort of sharing my story helps
Hmm.
demystify that creative process, and just because when you want to do something, there are so many people who want to make comics or want to do something creative, and there's so many reasons not to start doing it, or you know what I mean. Like you can come up with so many excuses not to do it, and I guess the book just shows that really the biggest thing is just hard work. You got to stick with it,
Hmm.
and you have to do the work, and that's talent and everything is like only a small percent of success. It's really persistence and the hard work that make you kind of push through. And yeah, so I think just sort of sharing that, because I think I get asked a lot, how do I break into comics? How do I, by young creators? And I think often they're looking for a secret cheat code, and the truth is it's kind of like, well, it just takes a lot of hard work and and you have to do a lot of bad comics before you start doing some good ones, and people don't want to hear that, they want like
Hmm.
the quick instant success thing. But, it was like half a decade of doing bad comics before I published anything, and I just, I think I think you know, just sharing that sort of some of the struggles and the ups and downs and all that stuff is just hopefully makes people realize like the real joy is the process itself. It is making the comics. It's not any kind of success that comes afterwards, because that stuff's fleeting. And if you're not enjoying it, if you don't actually love just the actual act of sitting down and drawing, telling stories, then maybe you shouldn't be doing it, because that's the joy of it, of anything really. But you gotta be in the moment, enjoy the work.
Well said. And it kind of reminds me of something you posted on your Substack. When David Lynch passed away, you had wrote a post on your Substack, and you said, thank you for inspiring me to become an artist and for showing me the importance of focusing on the joy of doing the work itself, not what may come from it. And I thought that was a very powerful quote. When did that really start to click for you, that it's about like the journey and, doing the things you love, not what it will return or any type of like financial or, rewards?
Yeah. Well, I think it was a gradual thing, it's like, when I was younger and just starting out, and I did the Essex County graphic novels, they were successful in terms of like critical acclaim and stuff, but I was still working a day job as a cook. They weren't making, those books, while critically acclaimed and stuff, they weren't enough to live off of. Right. And I think that realization then was like, oh, okay, I really love doing this. And that's probably going to be my life. Like, I'm not going to make a living doing this. So I'm going to work a day job as a cook or whatever. And then I'll do my comics as my passion and just sort of enjoy that life. And so I never really went into it thinking I would work for Marvel or DC Comics and I'd make a lot of money and have film adaptations and all this other stuff. Like, I really was just in it for the comics, for making it. And I guess that's how I started. And then obviously when you start to actually get some success and things, it shifts everything. And it is easy to start chasing that, if you're not careful. But, I think over the course of my career, the stuff I'm most proud of and the stuff that kind of fills me up the most is those times where there's just the creative joy of creating those things and doing the books themselves, not all the other stuff around it. So yeah, it's sort of a perspective that comes with age and time, I think, a little bit too.
Our careers are world apart, but what you just said is a similar piece of advice that I give a lot of aspiring podcasters. I run a podcast networking group here, community in Jax called Jax Podcasters United. So we have a lot of like aspiring and newbie folks that want to get into podcasting, and they're always asking like, hey, what do I need to like hit the ground running and be successful? How do I make money off of a podcast? And it's always like, no. That may never come at all. Like, you got to do this for the love of the game. Like, whatever your topic or show is about, you better be super passionate about it to like spend countless hours crafting a good show and editing and everything that goes with promoting and etc. It's like, don't even factor that in. Like if your heart's not in it, you will quickly burn out and be demoralized and I think that's applicable to any kind of like creative a job or outlet or hobby, whatever it may be. Like, you got to be fueled by like just raw passion.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't love it, forget it. You're not gonna, and people aren't gonna enjoy it. They're gonna be able to see that. And that's early on. I just decided, I'm just gonna do the stuff that I really love doing, and the kinds of stories I really love doing. And chances are, if I love doing it, that'll come through in the work, and someone else will too. And so far, that's always worked for me. And it's those few times where I've taken a job or an assignment for other reasons that they haven't worked. It's like you quickly kind of learn those lessons.
Yeah. And I think it comes across in your work, especially now. I loved getting to the point in the book where you had a couple of like projects with Marvel and DC, and then like you ended up finding out or really leaning into like I think your first project Image was Descender, and like just falling in love with creator owned work. Like the way that came across in the book in that chapter was like, oh wow. Like I said, it feels like I'm reading a book that confirms and some even denies like certain things that we as fans have conversations about. Like like I can't tell you how many conversations I've had at the comic shop or among friends about like, oh, like they're just doing this to they're doing these two projects to get into the creator owned stuff. That's the route to go, like, so to read this and see your journey and then to have some things confirmed or fleshed out a little more, I think that's where the joy comes for me as a longtime comic fan, is to have certain, I don't know, just things verified. And I wanted to ask you a question, because you mentioned in the I think right before you got the Marvel and DC, you said something about like you had never really aspired, you had no ambition to be a comic book writer. You just wanted to be a cartoonist doing your own thing. And I was wondering, at this point in your career, is there still a difference in your mind between being a comic book writer and a cartoonist? And does that distinction like still matter to you now?
Yeah, there is a difference. It's a totally different way of approaching the work. It just, when you're drawing it yourself as well, it's just a completely different creative process. You get to go much deeper, and you have complete and total control. And so, yeah, it's hard, as much as I love writing for people like Dustin Nguyen and whoever, it is a different thing. And, but I'm just kind of lucky in that I'm able to juggle. For whatever reason, I've always been able to juggle multiple things. So I don't have to choose between doing those two things anymore. I can just kind of get to do whatever I want. And so I can always be drawing my own thing, and then I still have time to write stuff for those guys and enjoy that collaboration, But I think at the end of the day, as I get older and sort of slow down, I'm sure it'll kind of go back to where it started, where I'm just writing and drawing my own book, That's kind of the goal.
Speaking about collaboration, and I do have some questions about some other collaborators of yours, but in particular focusing on this book, so you're the writer of the book, and then you're working with designer Courtney Menard on 10,000 Ink Stains. I was curious, how does this process and your work with Courtney, the designer of 10,000 Ink Stains, differ from? I guess, how did your approach differ from your usual like script writing and story outlines for a comic book versus something that's entirely about you and your life?
Yeah, it was very different. When you're writing a script, you're still telling the story. You're controlling the pacing. You're creating characters and stuff. And this was much different. This was more. I mean, I wrote the essays, so those were the spine of the thing, and that's the shape of it, right? And then it was really just a matter of going through all my stuff and scanning everything, and just giving Courtney a big file of everything. And
so you did all the manual work of scanning everything.
Well, I hired my niece to do this. Yeah.
I love that. That is perfect.
The more important images that kind of relate to things in the essays, and then her kind of looking at my body of work and trying to come up with an aesthetic that looked like my work,
Yeah.
So she, it was just sort of that step-by-step kind of thing.
That's
was different. It wasn't sort of visual panel-to-panel storytelling. It was more like, let's find images and artwork and stuff that kind of complements what I'm writing about in the essays. And yeah.
I got to say, having your niece do the heavy duty lifting of like scanning it's the perfect niece nephew task I've ever heard. So kudos on that. And shout out to your niece.
And she was happy to do it. It was a great job for her.
I think the other, speaking about, more about the structure of the book, that is one thing I got to give you props, as well as Courtney, is the formatting and structure of the book. It's a timeline. I mean, you are literally working from, your time, growing up in Essex County to all the way, up to like Minor Arcana. I think you said you finished writing.
I think I wrote the last thing like last summer, like a year ago.
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah.
And I love that each chapter is like a different phase from, here's how Sweet Tooth got made. And then I got the opportunity with DC Comics. Here's my Marvel era. And then here's my creator owned era. And I love that it is just a straightforward timeline. There isn't much like jumping around, maybe like here and there, but for the most part, it's a pretty linear story, which I really appreciate. But it got me thinking, like, was the goal did you have a certain goal in mind? Like, okay, I'm going to tell up to this point, or like, where does page count, like matter at all when you're doing an exercise like this?
I didn't worry about page count because I didn't really know how I didn't have a concept of, how much room the images and stuff take. I just worried when I was writing the essays, I did write them in chronological order, because I just sort of found, like, with anything, you start remembering things and it just sort of comes out like a cascade, So it was just easy to organize it by sticking to to that chronological order. And also, I mean, I think it's just the most accurate way to see like the arc of a career and of my work and everything. So just organizing it by from book to book. It just seemed like a simple and easy way to do that. Yeah. But I didn't worry too much about the length when I was writing. I just kind of wrote, and then later there was some editing and whatnot.
Got it. And I said that you could fill a small library of your published work, but I think the same could be said about the unpublished projects, the things that never like came to fruition. And two that caught my eye or my attention from reading the book was you mentioned that there was a Starman and Dr. Star crossover with James Robinson writing it, and you would have done the art that never came to fruition. And then I think you mentioned a whole bunch of other like scrap projects, but that one like really caught my eye where I was like, oh my God, whatever petition I need to sign to make this happen, let's make it happen.
Listen, James, I have the script. James wrote it. And
oh my God.
It's hard to talk about. There was some legal stuff with Starman and Dr. Star, and DC was great. They were super supportive, but it just got kind of tricky with some legal things and we couldn't do it. But yeah, that would have been a blast. I mean, I love obviously the Dr. Star character, who's now Dr. Andromeda from Black Hammer, was heavily inspired by James and by his Starman stuff.
Awesome.
And so that would have been a really cool project. But and I was reminded, I actually did an interview with, I did another podcast a week or two ago, and we had like a conversation with Paul Pope, and Paul reminded me there was like a brief second where he and I almost did Black Bolt at Marvel together. So I'd forgotten.
Wow. Holy shit.
Yeah. There's always little things like that.
Yeah.
That are, you could fill a book with like all those almost happened projects, that sounds so cool, but everyone's got them who works in the industry. But yeah, those are a couple neat ones.
Yeah, no, that sounds, there was like I think you mentioned like a Thor miniseries that they wanted you to write and all that. So I don't know, I guess.
Yeah, I remember that was like the first, when I was doing Sweet Tooth, DC asked me to pitch Superboy, and then Marvel asked me to pitch this Thor miniseries at the same time, and I pitched both, and then the DC one just kind of took off, and I kept going with DC. So yeah, it didn't really happen.
If they were to both company, I guess any company, if any company was wanted you to come in and pitch something to them, based on your choice, is there any publisher or character that you're still kind of maybe yearning to write or take a swing at?
Yeah, I don't know if there's any more. I feel like I've scratched all those itches. Like I wanted to do Swamp Thing, and I got to do that at Black Label, and I always wanted to do the JSA, and I'm doing that right now. So yeah, like all the big ones I've kind of got to do, and then you really, I think, really just want to keep doing more creator-owned stuff. That's really where I have more fire for that really than the other stuff.
One that comes to mind for me that I think you would absolutely probably knock it out the park, I would love to see your interpretation, both writing and art, is Hellboy. I don't know why, but I feel like there would be something there with you and Hellboy.
That'd be cool. Yeah, I love Mike, so it's a great world.
Yeah. You mentioned in the book as well that just the level of difficulty of trying to break into comic books. Not just trying to break into comic books, but also creating comic books at the at the time that you were in college, drawing, trying to come up with like concepts and create like these zines and self-published work, like the level of effort that went into it, whether that be going to like a Kinko's and Xeroxing it yourself and Staples and mailing things out, and you had to apply for the Kevin Eastman grant to all these things all these loopholes and things that you had to jump through to even get your work made. I thought was fascinating, and I want to know, do you feel like do you think you would have it easier or harder in today's age of the internet and social media breaking into comics versus when you started?
I think it'd be harder now. I think ironically, we didn't have the internet, so you had to do a lot of other sort of more grassroots kind of ways of sharing your work, like mailing it out to people and doing like a lot of small press shows, like in conventions and things. And whereas today, you can just basically post your work online instantly. But the fact is that now there's just so much stuff out there. Like it's so oversaturated with content and with media, and to get your stuff seen by people or someone to pay attention to is much harder because there's so much more
That's what I said.
competition and noise in the world, I think, than there was when I started.
Well said. And this and at this point in your career, is it? What is it? I'm trying to frame this question here, but what does it mean to be a Canadian comic creator in an industry that primarily, or at least seems to, skew towards American readers? And maybe that's just specifically for the direct market. Like, do you think that in this day and age, with the internet and comics being this global thing, that the Canadian perspective is still like unique? Like, do you think that that's still an edge that you've got, and still untapped potential in terms of like storytelling or influence? And
I don't know if it's an edge or anything like that, but I just think I've the first success I really had was Essex County, and that was telling a very specific, very regional story, but it did really well all over, like in the States and everything. And that taught me really early on in my career that the more specific you can be about a place in your storytelling is actually makes it more universal. Like, for whatever reason, the more detail, the more nuance that you can draw from real life and put into that stuff, you would think it might alienate readers, but it does the opposite. It actually makes it seem more real to them. And so I learned early on that was the case. So I feel like whenever I can, I try to do that. I try to be specific about where I live and our country and Ontario or wherever, all the things that I know intimately, the places I know, because you can just add more shades to it and more flavor than if you're talking about some place you've never been or only visited once, and it just allows for more honest storytelling. I think more than anything. It's not for any sort of political reason or anything like that. It's just more of the old right what you know. There is a lot of truth to it because you just bring more of yourself to the work.
And I actually wrote down one of these quotes from the books. You said, creating personal work means looking at your real life and telling honest stories, which, I was like, man, that means a lot.
Yeah, I think when people, when you say personal, this is a personal project or a personal story, the assumption often is that you mean that it's autobiographical, but that to me is not true. I feel like you said, it's just being emotionally honest and honest about where you are in your life or what's going on. It doesn't have to be directly autobiographical,
So grew up in Essex County, Ontario. I believe you live now in Toronto. And for the layman that has maybe never been to Canada or doesn't know much about Canada, like how different are these two worlds for you? And then I also want to ask, what is the comic scene like in Toronto?
Well, I mean, where I grew up was extremely rural, like just complete flat farmland with the closest neighbor is kilometers away, and so going from there to when I came here I came here in '95 to go to school. It's a very dense urban center. There's two completely different worlds, and I kind of love the contrast of that. I think you see it in a lot of my work where there's a rural and a urban sort of worlds colliding. You sort of see it in Black Hammer and Gideon Falls and all these places. So you pull a lot of that to the work as well. In terms of the comic scene here, I mean, it's pretty vibrant. TCAF is a really well-respected and vibrant show, and there are, dozens of professionals working here. Chip Zarsky and Francis Manipul and Ramon Perez, and there's a lot of us that live and work in the city. So it's a pretty vibrant scene. It's pretty good.
I want to stick to on the topic of Canada because I found, you've got hella awards to your name, Schuster Awards, Eisner Awards, but the one that really piqued my interest is that you won a Canada Reads Award in 2011 under the category Most Essential Canadian Novels of the Past Decade, and I guess every category had a celebrity backer or spokesperson, and yours happened to be Sarah Keene. Is that Sarah Keene from the band?
Yeah.
Keegan and Sarah, which I was like, holy shit! I the amount of people I know that loved Keegan and Sarah in their heyday, like in their prime, is through the roof. So for them to also like, be associated with Jeff Lemire and, you winning this, what I assume is a very prestigious award, I thought was a very interesting little tidbit to have. And I guess what I want to ask is, what do you think is, in your mind, an essential Canadian novel? Whether that be a comic book or, a prose book, like, and it could be your personal favorite.
My favorite Canadian cartoonist has always been Seth. So his book Clyde Fans, which came out maybe years ago, finally, it was sort of a 20-year project for him. He started in the late 90s and just finished it a couple of years ago. And for me, that's like a quintessential Canadian graphic novel for sure.
I mean, Jeff, that's got to be kind of crazy that, you have an award that's like, hey, this is like an essential Canadian novel. I think that's a hell of a flex. But I also know that you're very modest when it comes to it. So I just want to say that's one hell of a flex.
Thanks. I actually didn't win. They chose, I think, 5 books as like nominated for it, and mine was one of the 5. So I didn't win the actual award, but it was still, I think it was the first graphic novel at the time that had been part of the competition. I think a few others have been involved since, and I think one recently won. So it's come a long way. But yeah, it was very cool for sure. It was awesome to be a part of that.
Jeff Lemire walked so that other book could run and win the award. That's awesome. All right. Jeff, the other fascinating thing that I really appreciated from the memoir is how much you talk about your workspace. And the joy, and then even sometimes like the conflict that came with like certain workspaces that you were in. I think, you talk about one of your workspaces being a like nook in the basement crammed between the washroom and the washing machine. And, I'm looking at you on video, and the workspace looks much more spacious than said nook.
Yeah,
I guess like how important is the workspace, for your, that's not even a very good question, because I mean, it's a very important thing. But is there anything in your office that you couldn't live without? Like, is there anything essential that you need to have in your office?
I think what I've learned over the years, I mean, I'm really lucky now that I have an awesome space with tons of room and everything. But really, it's just space to store all my junk. the actual work will have to be in one tiny corner,
Yeah.
So I think over the years I've learned that all I really need is my drawing desk and my drawing tools, and the rest is all just icing on the cake. You don't really need it. It's fun to have all the stuff around me, but my most productive period of my career probably was, I think, around 2008, 2009. I came up with Black Hammer, Sweet Tooth, Underwater Welder, a bunch of my sort of bigger things, all within the same 2 or 3 year period. And that was all when I was crammed between the cat litter and the washing machine in our old basement. I don't think it's as important, it's just another excuse I think people make not to do the work. You need the space, you need whatever. Honestly, you need the essentials. You need ink and a desk and your pencils. I mean, I'm glad I have the space I have now. It's fun, but I don't need it so much. Yeah.
God forbid this ever happens, but let's say fire breaks out. You can only grab whatever 2 or 3 items from your current workspace / studio. What are you immediately grabbing?
Oh, yeah, that's tough.
What's the prized possessions?
I mean, I have a lot of original art on my walls from other artists that I love, and I have a portrait of David Lynch that Bill Sienkiewicz did for me. That like it's probably my prized possession, so I'd have to grab that. And yeah, I mean, it would be hard to pick though, because I have some stuff here I really love artwork wise.
That sounds awesome. I mean, Bill Sienkiewicz is worth running into a flaming building to try to grab some original art. And I guess on the topic of original art and whatnot, I want to get back to talking about your collaborators. And I have a list of some of my favorite artists that you've worked with in the past. In the book, you talk about that it's not very hard for you to when it comes to choosing which books you'll draw yourself versus working with an artist, because you said you start with the idea based on what artist you're working with. And I found that pretty fascinating. So I'd love to hear what words come to mind, or stories or whatever they may be when I say the following creators. All right. I'll start off with Dustin Nguyen, who you've worked on Descenders, Ascenders, and then this new Batman and Robin series as well. What words come to mind of Dustin Nguyen?
kids. Dustin draws the best kids, and I love writing kids. So the projects we tend to do so far, I mean, look at Descender is all about the young robot boy. Little Monsters was child vampires, and then Robin and Batman was obviously Robin. So there is a trend there that stories about kids and children it's really his strength, and I love doing them as well. So, yeah.
I can't wait for the new for the next year's Eisner Awards. There needs to be a topic for best kids drawn category. Yeah. Dustin would sweep that.
Babies next.
Okay, how about we go to something current on the current Absolute Flash series of DC Comics, working with Nick Robles, who I won't lie was brand new to me. I'm reading Absolute Flash, and I got to say, his artwork is absolutely amazing, and whoever the colorist is on that series as well. I mean, gorgeous colored work.
Yeah, Adriano Lucas. Yeah, so I mean, I knew Nick's stuff mostly just from social media, seeing his pinups and stuff. And then Nick worked with a friend of mine, Tate Bromble, on a book at Boom, where I saw his interior work for the first time and loved that. But it was like a new thing for me to be working with Nick on this too. So I didn't really know him, and I kind of had to feel each other out. And but it was really early on that Nick did the first few designs for Wally West, and he kind of was playing around with the visual language of what Wally's powers could look like in this new iteration, because we were really, the one thing I was really trying to do was like, just because it's a Flash, it doesn't have to be the same Flash. It doesn't have to be the same powers. Like it can be something completely different and new. And Nick really started playing around with the visual aspects of that and adding this weird sort of almost, I don't know how to explain it, but you'll see it when you look at the book, but kind of expressing Wally's powers almost with these geometric shapes and color and stuff. And it was kind of a revelation. And then it's fun when you see stuff like that early on in the process. And then I could start writing new stuff based on his visual ideas, and you kind of build off each other back and forth. So yeah, it's been really fun. And he does really, really great character work as well, which is the most important thing, I think. And yeah, it's been fun. It's been a great match between he and I think.
Awesome. Yeah. And I believe issue 5 will be out by the time this interview comes out. So if if you're not reading Absolute Flash, absolutely check it out. All right. How about we go to, how about this name here? Dean Ormstrom, who is, your co-creator on Black Hammer, which for me, pound for pound might be my favorite project from you, Jeff.
Thanks, man. Yeah. So Black Hammer, when I was doing that, this would have been, I came up with Black Hammer a long time ago, like right after Essex County back in the day, when I didn't think I'd ever get to do superhero comics, for Marvel or DC for real. So I kind of, this is my version of superhero comics. But I never really got to do it back then. And then when I started writing books for other artists, that kind of came up as, well, maybe I can do this with someone else. And I had met Dean when I was doing Animal Man for DC. I'd met Dean in England at a show, and I had loved his Vertigo stuff from the 90s. And so we kind of hit it off. He had a real horror sensibility about his work. It's very dark, lots of shadows. He loves drawing monsters. And so I've always kind of kept him in mind for a project one day. And then when I thought about doing Black Hammer again, I wanted someone to draw that book who didn't typically draw superheroes. I didn't want it to look like a Marvel or DC superhero comic. I wanted it to not look superhero-y, but be about superheroes, have its own vibe. So Dean came up as someone who would be interesting to see, well, how would he draw superheroes, and that's why I think his sort of dark sensibility with lots of shadows and everything just brought a new sort of flavor to that universe.
I brought, on the topic of that, I mentioned, the Patton Oswalt quote blurb that's on the book itself or in the marketing. And it makes me think that, obviously I got to think about what he's doing with Minor Threats, which another indie superhero universe that I'm thoroughly enjoying. And I've definitely gone on record to say that I think Black Hammer was kind of like one of the, that it's one of those series that, crawled so that way series like Minor Threats could, really run. And obviously micro superhero indie universes are not like anything new. There's plenty that have come before and after, but I look at Black Hammer and to see how many spinoffs and how that world and, how you and Dean, the other collaborators have like really kind of fleshed it out and, introduced characters and all the different lore, I guess, how do you feel about the current state of, when you look at something like Minor Threats and more creators like being able to, like, hey, I love superhero comics, but I'm, creating my own world here.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think that's the joy of superheroes for me has always been seeing they're so malleable, seeing different artists, different writers bring their own sensibilities, their own styles, their own voice to these sort of well-known characters or whatever has always been the joy of reading comics for me. And then taking it a step further of creating your own worlds and your own superhero universes and seeing different creators do that. It's really fun. I love seeing it. It's great.
All right. The last name I'll mention here is Andrea Sorrentino, who you've worked with on numerous occasions. Green Arrow, Old Man Logan, Gideon Falls, et cetera, et cetera. What words come to mind when you think of Andrea?
His layouts are unreal. Like he just, I'll give him an idea and he'll take it and push it to 15, with his layouts. He just really so inventive in his storytelling. And then I think more than any other artist I work with, it's like this different push and pull of collaboration where I'll have an idea, I'll give it to him. He'll come back with something really different from what I imagined, or he'll enhance what I imagined in a different way that inspires new story ideas. So it's like a back and forth. I talked about that with Nick a little bit, but Andrea as well, where it's like more of a conversation back and forth idea. It's like throwing a volleyball, tossing it back and forth. And then the story becomes sort of greater than the sum of its parts, and it kind of grows out of that. So I kind of love that sort of back and forth we have.
I think just looking at your Green Arrow series with him, there are so many pages from that book that are still burned in my memory of like picking them up off the shelf when they came out, and just how inventive he was with the layout and some of the like geometric shapes and patterns, and it's like all of this in a Green Arrow comic. Am I reading the right character? Yeah, Andrea is like, I mean, where his mind goes is so impressive, and I think you've got such a knack for picking these artists that bring a different flavor and a different mindset. Like no two projects to me, especially the ones where you're writing and working for an artist, ever feel the same. And I think pound for pound, you probably have worked with some of the best artists out there. Like your collaborations like are top notch, man. I guess how do you go about picking your collaborative partners? I know for a lot of times it's like, hey, especially if working Marvel DC, they've already got an artist in mind and you guys to meet. But like in today's day and age, going back to the topic of social media and the internet and people being able to share their work, are you ever looking for, up and coming artists on things like Instagram or DeviantArt and things like that?
Not so much, because I'm usually so busy with the projects I'm working on that I don't have time to like start thinking of new projects for new artists. So yeah. And I've also at this point kind of developed these longer relationships with specific people that I want to keep going, So I think when I was starting out at DC and Marvel, like you said, you'd sometimes get paired with an artist you didn't know, and it would be great, or sometimes it wouldn't click as much. And that's what that happened with Andrea and with a few other people. And when you find the ones that you work with, you really hold on to them. So it's like, or you try to anyway. And so yeah, I think more than anything, it's like you develop these relationships over time on multiple projects, and then you become attached to those people, and you want to keep doing those things.
Yeah.
So it becomes more as much about the friendships and stuff as it does about the work itself, I think, sometimes.
You know what? On the topic of your workload, I want to shift gears and get into the short box friends and family segment. So this is the part where I shut up for a little bit and I let a friend and family chime into the conversation. In this case, I'm going to toss it up to my boy, Chris Hacker, one half of the Oblivion Bar podcast, who you were on their podcast a couple of weeks ago. Fantastic interview. I asked him to send in a question for you. I was like, hey, Chris, you guys had a great conversation. Is there any questions you weren't able to get around to? And he sent in a voicemail. So let's hear from Chris.
Yo, what is up, Shortbox Nation? This is Chris Hacker, co-host of the Oblivion Bar podcast. Botter reached out to me to see if I had another question for Jeff Lemire, because Jeff, if you're listening to this right now, you are like, wow, I just heard from this guy about a week ago. He doesn't leave me alone. And for that, I apologize. But when Botter comes asking for more questions to Jeff Lemire, I am going to provide that. So we obviously talked for about 40 minutes on our episode together, which I think turned out incredibly well, and I'm glad that that's out there and that people are excited about it. But another question for you that we sort of briefly touched on, but didn't really get into in depth. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. And we talked about how you're working on a lot of things at once, and not all of this is necessarily being worked on at the same exact time, but you have a lot of things out at the same time. But I am curious, just what does your workload look like on a daily or maybe even weekly basis? How do you handle multiple projects at once? What does your process sort of look like in terms of how you get in those different headspaces and how you add more to each of those stories with multiple characters and storylines and all the things in your head? So I'd be curious to hear your answer. Excited to listen to this interview between you and Botter. Shout out to Botter, one of my BFFs in the podcasting space. And hope you guys have a great time. Thank you.
Big shout outs to Chris, Oblivion Bar Podcast. Check it out.
Yeah, so I mean, I tend to compartmentalize things. So I kind of only work on one thing at a time, and I get really into whatever book it is. So obviously drawing takes longer than writing. So right now I'm doing Minor Arcana as a monthly comic, So drawing an issue of that usually takes 4 or 5 weeks. So it'll be 4 or 5 weeks of just intense drawing every day. Like I don't write anything. I just come in and I'm really focused on the visual aspect of drawing and telling a story that way. And then usually by the time I finish an issue of Minor Arcana, I'm burnt out on drawing and I need a break, which is great. And then I'll take like a week or two and I'll just write something. And then I've staggered my projects so I don't have, I usually have to do one at a time. And so I'm starting a new issue of Minor Arcana today, but when I finished the previous one, I took 2 weeks and just worked on JSA, and I think I wrote 3 full scripts in that 2 weeks. I just got completely absorbed in that world again, and it takes a couple of days to get thinking about it again. But then when you get rolling, I like to get a lot done when I'm really in the world. So I try to get multiple scripts done rather than just do one at a time, because I feel like you write a script and then you wait a month and you have to get back into it again and remember where you were and kind of get back into the feeling. So when I'm in that space that had like the flow of that world and those characters, I like to write a bunch of it so it has a cohesive feel, So I'll write like for 2 weeks, I'll just write constantly and do 2 or 3 or 4 scripts. And then I'm burnt out on writing, which is great because it's time to start a new issue. And then I get back into drawing. And it kind of keeps me fresh, like going between writing and drawing that way. You kind of get a break from one and then you get back into it, and it seems to work. It's always worked for me. It's kind of how I've been doing it since youth and the early DC days of kind of jumping back and forth like that.
What's the very first step in a brand new project? Like thinking, I guess Minor Arcana being a good example, or any one that you want to mention, but like what's the first step that you do for a brand new project? And does it differ if you're writing and drawing it or just writing?
Yeah, it does. So I mean, there's lots of projects that I'm thinking about now for the future, but so you get little seeds of ideas and things you kind of are thinking about, but you got to give those things time to kind of sit, and I don't have time to get to them yet anyway. So usually there's like a year or two of just sort of, you kind of have a core idea or something that you're kind of interested in, and you're just kind of letting your subconscious work on it, and I write down little bits and pieces here and there until I feel like I've got enough that, okay, I'm ready to actually start writing this now or whatever. And that, usually it's like a year or two of kind of slow development before I get into that stage. And the difference between the writing and drawing is that if it's something I'm going to write for Dustin or something, you're just writing ideas in your notebook. But if it's something I'm going to kind of maybe want to draw, then you're also sketching, so there's a visual element to it.
Nice. I want to pivot really quick because this just came to mind. But in the book, you mentioned there's a whole chapter dedicated to your time working on the Essex County live action show, and I found that chapter both ironic, I think also full circle. Because, in the beginning, you talk about going to college to learn film, and then eventually, kind of shifting gears to focus on comics full time. And then here you are many years later working on adapting one of your comic books into a show. So I'm like, oh, well, that's kind of cool that he got to go back to his like, film school route or, path and maybe those skill sets. But you were very honest, like, hey, this is not, like it's great, but it's also a lot of work, a lot of like rewriting on the spot, which I thought was really fascinating. You talking about like we would literally rewrite scenes right on the moment because like logistical things, like real life, like, hey, we don't have enough whatever daylight. So well, how do we approach this scene?
Mhm.
And you talk about how much of a toll that took on you, energy wise, and all of that stuff. And I could have sworn I was like, man, it'd be curious if he ever goes back to working in live action. And I don't know if it was the Substack or maybe something else I seen, but I seen something that you're working on a Black Hammer live adaptation. Is that accurate?
Um, I'm not really supposed to talk about that.
Oh, say
but
less.
yeah, there's always been some Black Hammer stuff going on in the background that I've been doing some
Okay.
adaptations and stuff. Nothing imminent. But yeah,
Okay.
I mean, yeah, that was a really challenging process doing that show. It
So
was.
what brought you back then? I guess what even made you curious about possibly doing more, TV or whatever it may be? I guess, yeah. I guess what brings you back?
Yeah, well, I haven't. I think the Black Hammer thing you're talking about, I actually wrote before I did that Essex County stuff. So yeah, I haven't. Yeah, since I got done the show, I've really just been focusing on comics. There's something that's come up in the last couple months that's kind of interesting that I'm dabbling with, but who knows if it'll even happen. You got to stay open to new things. I just close doors. But yeah, really, comics is that doing that show as much as it was sometimes thrilling and sometimes heartbreaking and all the things together. I think more than anything, it just made me appreciate the directness of comics and the creative freedom that I have doing comics. And so I think, yeah, the TV and movie stuff is always kind of interesting, but it's never the priority, I guess.
Got it. Yeah. And I think it shows just in the amount of work that you've currently got going on. I mean, you've got Minor Arcana going on, Absolute Flash, the new Batman and Robin series of Dustin and Wynn. What else you got, Jeff? I'm drawing a blank. I know there's like I'm just
too. There's
Which
others.
one?
What am I doing? I don't know. JSA.
Minor. JSA. That's right.
Then I'm working on some new creator on stuff that we'll announce later.
How do you what do you do when you take a break? Like, how do you decompress and step away
from it? Whenever I do.
What is like? Do you work even through the weekend? Like, what is
Yeah, I work Monday to Friday.
Damn.
I don't work on the weekend. Yeah,
that's fair.
Yeah, I got a pretty boring life, man. I just go home and spend time with my family and read and stuff.
No, man. I feel like at least the work is interesting as hell. All right, last question here. We're recording this episode. By the time this episode comes out, it'll be the Wednesday before San Diego Comic-Con. I believe you're doing a couple of panels, a couple of things at San Diego Comic-Con. Obviously, I want to know, what can people expect from you at San Diego Comic-Con? And then just and out of curiosity, like, I said in the beginning, you always struck me as someone that was reserved, very modest. Like, do you do a lot of traveling to conventions? Is that like your opportunity to kind of like, get out of your shell, meet, the fans and other creators? Like, do you enjoy traveling for conventions?
I do. I enjoy the social aspect of meeting and being able to spend time with other creators, because I don't get a chance to do that, and often that's the only time I get to spend time with some of my collaborators as well. I like that aspect of it. The show itself can be kind of grueling. So, I mean, I don't do a lot. I usually do just one or two a year. Really.
Okay, got it.
Mostly because I'm so busy and family stuff and with work that, traveling it takes a lot of time and it can really disrupt the workflow. And I really just enjoy working. So I'd rather be home making comics than going somewhere and talking about it. It is really the truth. But yeah, I do like seeing people, like it's always nice to connect with readers and remind yourself that, oh yes, real human beings are reading my stuff and it's not just like whatever. So that's always awesome. And it's great to, like I said, socialize with friends in the industry and stuff.
All right, Jeff, I got one last question, and it goes back to what we were talking about in terms of like how honest you are about like, just things that you deal with, right? Like, anxiety, depression, and, how that has been a part of your journey in comic books. And I guess if you had to give a piece of advice to a fellow comic creator, whether they're aspiring, established, or whatnot, that are also dealing with the same things, like, what would you say to them to help them kind of overcome those really like those rough patches that we all have, but in particular folks that like are dealing with that extra?
Yeah, I mean, when I was younger in my 20s and early 30s, I went through a lot of that and a lot of self-doubt. And I guess what I would say is that you can find ways to manage it and live with it and still be productive and follow your dreams and achieve them. You don't have to give up, and that as bad as it may seem on any given day, tomorrow always comes, and you may not feel the way tomorrow that you feel today. So don't give up, I guess I often remind myself of that, but yeah, I think just knowing that you're not alone and there's other people out there feeling the same way, and that there's always a better tomorrow, just to hold on. Yeah.
Words to live by, Jeff. I appreciate that a lot. Jeff, actually, I got one more question I'm going to splice earlier, but I think this might be good here. You mentioned Paul Pope earlier, and speaking about Chris Hacker, he just dropped a fantastic interview with Paul Pope over on the Oblivion Bar podcast. I think on that same day, you had posted something on your Instagram about the artists you grew up reading and inspired by in your comic book journey, Paul Pope being among them. And I was just curious to bring that full circle. What is it about Paul Pope's artwork or work that resonates with you as a fellow creator? Like, have you had it sounds like you've had a chance to meet him and even maybe have like some work in the way, but yeah, Paul Pope.
Yeah, when I came to Toronto to do film stuff in my I guess I was in my early 20s. It was the mid 90s, and I never really stopped reading comics, but I definitely had slowed down. Superhero comics at the time weren't really doing it for me, and I was reading the Vertigo stuff, but even that, the first wave of all the Vertigo stuff had kind of come and gone, and I was not as in love with the medium as I had been as a kid, and then when I started doing film stuff, and I enjoyed it, but I felt I missed drawing, and I kind of missed that aspect. And I went to a comic shop here, and I saw Paul's work for the first time. I had never seen it before, and just was immediately struck by like the expressiveness and energy of his brushwork, and the immediacy of it, and the spontaneity of his lines and everything. And it just got me really excited, and it got me to start drawing again. I bought a sketchbook probably the same day and some brushes, and started to try to do what he was doing. And it really got me back into just the joy of drawing, seeing his stuff. So yeah, it was very fundamental in getting me back into comics.
Jeff, one of the things you talk about in that book that I've got a good like chuckle out of, but also like some insight, was the art class that you ended up taking, I think, like after college, and some of the unconventional art methods and tools that you were using in this class to kind of like get you to think, bigger and wider. You mentioned something about using a celery stick dipped in ink to draw, and I was like, I gotta see what that artwork looks like. But do you still practice or do any unconventional exercises or practices or tools like in your artwork or work today?
As much as you should. It's a really interesting exercise where you bring all these different objects to class, and you have to use those to draw instead of your traditional pencils or pens or brushes, because it can really break you out of like. You can really get in the train tracks where you start using a certain tool or a certain thing and you get stuck just doing that, and you can kind of stop experimenting, and that can really force you to like let go of everything you're comfortable with and just like make mistakes and get messy and just see what different making marks with different things looks like. And you start to see potential in little things that of course are messy and crazy at first, but you see little things you can kind of follow. And it's just a good kind of exercise to break you out of patterns, really, and it was good. Yeah,
well said. All right, lightning round question really quick, and obviously I think that your answer could change any day that you probably get this asked, but today, if you had to make a Mount Rushmore of your all-time favorite comic creators, whether they be writers, artists, or auteurs, who would be on that Mount Rushmore today?
You'd have to have Jack Kirby, Will Eisner, Joe Kubert, Alan Moore.
Solid lineup right there.
I mean, I'll stop at those four. Yeah, because I can't think of anyone else right now.
That's a fantastic Mount Rushmore. And I think with that being said, ladies and gents, this is the Shortbox Podcast, and we just finished talking to Jeff Lemire about his life, his career, and his new book, 10,000 Ink Stains, a Memoir. You can pick it up at your local comic shop. You can pick it up on Amazon and other fine bookstores around you right now. I have links to the book as well as links to Jeff's social media and Substack in the show, which I highly recommend. If you enjoyed this conversation, if you enjoy process and behind the scenes, the Substack is awesome, Jeff. It's great. So listeners, do yourselves a favor. Give those a look and follow Jeff online to stay current on all things that he's got going on. Obviously, you just heard the man. He's got so many projects he can't even remember it. I think we were up to like 6 current projects. So you can find Jeff Lemire's work everywhere that you get your comic books. Jeff, you've been fantastic. Any parting words or shameless plugs before we wrap up?
No, man, I'm good. Try to check out Minor Arcana if you haven't. It's sort of my passion project right now. And yeah, it was great talking to you, man. Thanks.